Feel free to recite along with me, my cousin Vinny fans. I'll paraphrase the juicier language. Imagine you're a deer. You're prancing along, you get thirsty, you spot a little brook, you put your little deer lips down to the cool, clear water. Bam! A bullet rips off part of your head. Your brains are lying on the ground in little bloody pieces. Now I ask you, would you care what kind of pants the person who shot you was wearing? Classic. Hilarious scene. Now, let's shift to something the opposite of funny. Imagine you're feverish. You're suffering from horrific diarrhea. You're bleeding from places you'd rather not even consider you could bleed from. You're 1 or 2 steps away from death. Wait! A doctor arrives with a miracle drug and says, "I can save you." Now I ask you, would you care what clothes the doctor who saved you was wearing? Save lives and alleviate suffering. It doesn't matter who's behind it. The so-called miracle drug ZMapp was given to a handful of people suffering from Ebola during the epidemic in West Africa in 2014. The compound was experimental in many ways. Number 1, it had been shown to save patients from dying from Ebola virus, but the patients were non-human primates, monkeys. Number 2, it could only be manufactured in extremely small amounts. 3, it had never been given to a human being before the summer of 2014, ever. And yet, facing impending, horrific death from an unforgiving, microscopic entity, well, maybe it was worth a try. The news began to spread that the US government had developed a miracle cure for Ebola. At the time, I was a science and technology manager for the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which is located in Northern Virginia. DTRA is the Defense Department's focal point for countering weapons of mass destruction threats. More to the point, the office in which I worked funded the initial development of ZMapp. That's right, ZMapp was an experimental drug originally developed by the US military. Did you know that? Knowing that now, would you take this drug? Does it seem more risky? Less risky? More rugged? More effective? Maybe. Would you really care who funded this drug? If it works, it works. And that's precisely the point. Save lives and alleviate suffering. It doesn't matter who's behind it. The ZMapp therapeutic is a cocktail of 3 antibodies that bind to and neutralize proteins made by the Ebola virus. ZMapp is actually the result of combined efforts among MAP Pharmaceuticals, Defense Research and Development Canada, our friends to the north, and the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, USAMRIID. With joint US government funding from both the Department of Defense and the Department of Health and Human Services. A true collaborative success story, you might say. As the ZMapp story made its rounds through the news, there were multiple responsible heroes within the US government. However, the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA, within the Department of Health and Human Services, received most of the public credit. Specifically, BARDA took over management and funding of ZMapp's advanced research and development. Well, mostly. The Defense Department still plays a strong supporting role. While this arcane intergovernmental funding might be supremely interesting to policymakers and scientists, such as myself, why should it matter to you? The Defense Department works on developing drugs to treat many infectious diseases. Some of these might be drugs you have taken, or maybe drugs you might one day need to take. DoD developed drugs against infectious diseases include anti-malarials, a dengue fever vaccine, antibiotics to treat anthrax and plague, and even AIDS and flu medications. More specifically, a small component of the DoD is dedicated to defending its personnel and the nation against biological threats. At the same time, the Department of Health and Human Services is dedicated to promoting the overall health and welfare of the entire nation. So, there's clearly a distinct overlap here. This might be worrisome: government waste, duplication of effort, bitter competition. However, This is actually an amazing opportunity, not only for the nation, but for the world. Save lives and alleviate suffering. It doesn't matter who's behind it. When the Defense and the Health and Human Services departments collaborated toward developing ZMapp, as well as several vaccine candidates, don't forget the vaccines, during the Ebola response in 2014, it highlighted an efficient interagency relationship within the US government. Bravo all. While the Defense Department develops drugs to treat servicemen and women in harm's way, Health and Human Services often does the exact same thing. The more these two departments coordinate, the better for us all. And the more diseases they collectively target, the better prepared we will be before the next big outbreak. One more time, save lives and alleviate suffering. It doesn't matter who's behind it.